It started like any other morning in Rio de Janeiro, bright, loud, and full of life. The sun rose over the crowded favelas, spilling golden light on the narrow streets that never truly slept. But beneath that sunshine was something darker brewing, something that had been building for months, a storm that would soon shake Brazil's biggest city to its core. News anchors would later call it the biggest drug raid in decades. But for the people living there, it wasn't just a headline. It was chaos, fear, and survival. On that morning, helicopters circled overhead, their blades cutting through the humid air. Hundreds of officers moved in silence, their eyes fixed on the maze of homes below. No one knew how the day would end, only that it wouldn't be like any other. And somewhere far from those crowded alleys, in a quiet bus rolling through the city's heart, a small moment of kindness was about to unfold. It had nothing to do with guns, drugs, or police raids, at least not on the surface. But life has a strange way of connecting people, even those who seem to live in completely different worlds. The boy's name was Lucas. He was just 17, tall and shy with headphones hanging around his neck and his school bag at his feet. He was tired, not just from the long day, but from the weight of a life that often felt too heavy for someone his age. Lucas lived in one of the neighborhoods near the hills, a place the media rarely showed except when there was trouble. He had learned to walk fast, talk little, and always keep his head down. That morning, when the bus jolted to a stop, a pregnant woman stepped in. She was white, well-dressed, and looked like she wasn't used to public transport. The other passengers glanced at her for a moment and then looked away. The bus was crowded, the air thick with heat and noise. Lucas didn't think twice. He stood up and offered her his seat. She smiled, a little surprised. "Thank you," she said softly, settling down with a tired sigh. Lucas nodded and went back to holding the handrail, swaying with the bus. He didn't know it yet, but that small gesture, that one simple act of respect, was about to change his life forever. Back in the favela, the raid had begun. Streets that were usually filled with music and laughter now echoed with the heavy boots of officers and the sharp bark of orders. It wasn't just another police operation. It was a full-scale war against the powerful drug mafia that controlled much of Rio's underground. 64 people would lose their lives that day. 81 would be taken away in handcuffs. But no one could say whether the city was any safer afterward, or if it had only buried its pain a little deeper. Families hid behind locked doors, praying the fighting wouldn't reach their homes. Children clutched their mother's arms as sirens wailed outside. Lucas's mother, Anna, was one of those mothers. She worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat, one cleaning houses, the other selling homemade food from their kitchen window. When the news broke about the raid, she froze. Her son had texted that he was on his way home, but hours had passed, and his phone had gone silent. The story of Brazil's drug war is often told through statistics: 64 dead, 81 arrested, 1 city shaken. But behind those numbers are faces, real people. A mother who doesn't know if her son will come home. A boy who just wanted to do the right thing. A woman carrying life inside her, grateful for a seat, unaware of the chain of events that would follow. As the bus rolled through the busy streets, the woman seemed restless. She kept glancing at her phone, typing messages, deleting them, typing again. Lucas noticed but didn't ask. He wasn't the kind to talk much. When the bus stopped near the city center, she stood up, smiled at him once more, and handed him a folded piece of paper. "For you," she said. "I think you might need this one day." Before Lucas could respond, she was gone, lost in the crowd outside. He looked at the note in his hand, confused. It wasn't until he got off at his stop that he opened it. Inside, in neat handwriting, were just a few words. "Your kindness will lead you to something bigger. When everything feels lost, remember this day." Lucas didn't understand what it meant. He slipped the note into his pocket and started walking home, unaware that his neighborhood was already in lockdown. Police had blocked every entrance, and gunfire echoed in the distance. He tried calling his mother, but there was no signal. At that same moment, a news anchor on television began reporting. "Breaking news. A massive raid is underway in northern Rio. Dozens dead. Over 80 arrests in an operation targeting one of Brazil's most dangerous drug factions." Lucas stopped in his tracks as he saw the familiar streets flashing on the screen in a store window. His chest tightened. That was his neighborhood. That was home. He started running. Each step echoed louder than the last, his breath short, his mind racing. The city seemed to blur around him, sirens, shouts, smoke rising in the distance. He didn't know if his mother was safe, if his friends were caught in the chaos, or if he'd even make it through the night. And somewhere, in another part of the city, that pregnant woman sat by her window, watching the same news, her hand resting on her belly. She didn't know the boy she had met was now running for his life, or that her simple note might become the key to a story that would connect them again, in a way neither could have imagined. The city that morning had felt alive. Now it felt like it was holding its breath, and in the heart of it all, between the chaos of a drug war and the quiet power of a stranger's kindness, two stories were about to collide, but how they would meet, no one could have predicted. Lucas didn't stop running until his legs began to ache. The streets he knew so well now looked unfamiliar, filled with flashing lights, police vans, and the sound of people shouting behind barricades. Smoke hung heavy in the air and the smell of burned tires stung his nose. He tried to look past the officers blocking the entrance to his neighborhood, searching for any sign of his mother. But all he could see were worried faces, people whispering, and a line of officers standing shoulder to shoulder. A woman nearby was crying quietly, clutching a phone that kept ringing. Lucas recognized her. She sold fruit at the market near his school. He wanted to ask what she'd seen, but his throat felt tight. Before he could speak, an officer stepped forward, telling everyone to move back. The raid was still ongoing, he said. It wasn't safe to enter. Lucas backed away slowly, his heart pounding. His mother was inside that zone. Their house, their neighbors, everything he knew, all trapped in the middle of what the news was already calling Brazil's biggest anti-drug operation in years. He walked to a small park nearby and sat down on a bench. Still clutching his phone, he kept checking for messages, for any call from his mother. Nothing. The battery was almost dead. Around him, people were doing the same thing, waiting, worrying, hoping. Every now and then, a burst of sirens or the low rumble of a helicopter would make everyone flinch. Somewhere across town, the pregnant woman, her name was Clara, sat watching the same chaos unfold on television. The screen flickered with live footage of the favelas under lockdown. Reporters spoke in fast Portuguese, listing numbers that didn't seem real. 64 dead, 81 arrested. She turned down the volume and pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the faint kick of her baby. Clara hadn't stopped thinking about that boy from the bus. The way he had stood so quietly, how his eyes looked older than his age. When she gave him that note, she didn't know why. It was almost instinct. Something about him reminded her of someone she'd once known, someone she'd lost. Her husband had worked as a journalist, one who believed too much in telling the truth. 2 years earlier, he'd gone missing while covering a story about the same drug mafia that was now all over the news. The police said he was probably dead, but Clara never accepted it. Every night she replayed their last conversation, trying to understand what he'd uncovered that had cost him his life. Now, watching the raid unfold, she couldn't shake the feeling that this operation was connected to him somehow. Her husband had told her once that corruption ran deep, that even some people wearing badges weren't always on the right side. Clara knew she should stay away, but curiosity kept pulling her closer. Meanwhile, Lucas found shelter in a small cafe. It was nearly empty, except for a few older men watching the news on a small TV near the counter. The owner recognized him and offered him a glass of water. Lucas mumbled a thank you and sat near the window, his eyes still on the street. On the TV, a reporter was explaining that the raid was part of a months-long investigation targeting a powerful cartel that had been moving drugs through the port of Rio de Janeiro. Police claimed they had received anonymous tips, and that this operation would bring peace back to the city. But the footage on the screen told another story. Families crying, houses torn apart, children watching silently from doorways. Lucas clenched his fists. He didn't know much about politics or corruption. All he knew was that people like his mother always ended up caught in the middle. The ones who worked hard, stayed quiet, and hoped to survive another day. As night fell, the police lifted the barricades on one side of the favela. Lucas rushed in with a small crowd of residents, his heart pounding as he climbed the narrow path toward his home. The closer he got, the more damage he saw. Walls cracked, windows shattered, doors hanging open. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long shadows. When he reached their house, the door was half open. He froze, His breath came shallow, his mind racing through every possibility. Then from inside he heard her voice. "Lucas." He ran inside, relief flooding through him. His mother was sitting on the couch, her face pale but unhurt. She told him the police had come, searching every house, shouting names she didn't recognize. They had taken a few of their neighbors away, including the young man who lived 2 doors down. Someone Lucas had grown up playing football with. Lucas sat beside her, trying to make sense of it all. "Why are they doing this?" he asked quietly. Anna looked at him with tired eyes. "They say they're fighting the drug lords," she said. "But sometimes I think they don't see the difference between them and us." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant hum of helicopters fading away. Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out the note the woman had given him earlier. He read it again slowly under the dim light. "Your kindness will lead you to something bigger. When everything feels lost, remember this day." He didn't understand it, but somehow it gave him a strange sense of calm. The next morning, the news channels were filled with analysis and interviews. Officials called the raid a success. The mayor promised justice. But on the streets, people whispered about what really happened. How some of the people killed weren't gang members at all, just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lucas's mother left early for work. Though the buses were running late and the streets were still tense, Lucas decided to go check on his friend Raphael's house, the one who'd been taken. The door was sealed with police tape. The entire block felt heavy, quiet as if holding its breath. Just then his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Lucas?" a woman's voice asked. He hesitated. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Clara," she said softly. "I think we met on the bus yesterday." Lucas's stomach tightened. He remembered her face instantly. "How did you get my number?" "You dropped your school card on the seat," she said. "I was going to give it back, but you got off before I could. Then I saw the news last night and I realized your neighborhood was part of the raid." There was a pause. "Are you okay?" she asked. Lucas didn't know why, but her voice felt different. Calm, but with something hidden underneath, like she knew more than she was saying. "I'm fine," he said. "My mom's okay too. But everything here's a mess." "I know," Clara whispered. "Listen, Lucas, there's something you should know about what's happening. I can't explain everything now, but the raid, it's not just about drugs. There are people involved who don't want the truth to come out. I think your neighborhood was targeted for another reason." Lucas frowned. "What reason?" But before she could answer, the call cut off. He stared at his phone, confused. The screen said no signal. He tried calling back, but the number didn't exist anymore. Outside, a group of police cars sped past, sirens blaring again. Lucas felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something was wrong, something much bigger than anyone around him seemed to understand. And miles away, Clara stood by her window, holding her phone tightly. Her husband's old notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with names, dates, and one phrase circled in red ink: Operation Sunfall. Her eyes moved from the page to the television, where new reports were flashing. Arrests, statements, promises. But she wasn't watching the officials. She was looking at a single image on the screen. A photo of the crowd near the barricades, taken during the raid. In the corner of that photo stood Lucas, the boy from the bus, looking up at the chaos, his face caught in the light of a burning street lamp. Clara's breath caught. Somehow she knew that boy was connected to everything her husband had died trying to expose, and in that moment she made a choice. The next day, she would find him. The next morning in Rio felt different. The usual noise of buses and street vendors was replaced by whispers, people talking about the raid, the arrests, and the rumors that followed. Some said the government had finally broken the backbone of the drug mafia. Others believed something darker was happening behind the scenes. But most people just wanted life to go back to normal. For Lucas, nothing felt normal anymore. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman from the bus, the strange note she'd given him, and that mysterious phone call that had ended too suddenly. Her words echoed in his mind. It's not just about drugs. He sat by the window of his small room, staring at the hills in the distance. From there, he could still see faint traces of smoke rising from where the raid had taken place. His phone was still off. Part of him didn't want to turn it on again. He was scared of what he might see. More news, more names, more faces he recognized. Downstairs, his mother was preparing breakfast quietly. She tried to smile when he came in, but her eyes were red from crying. "Raphael's mother came by this morning," she said softly. "They still don't know where he is." Lucas nodded but didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. Every time he tried to forget what had happened, something reminded him. The news, the neighborhood, even the note in his pocket, all of it tied him back to that one day. Across the city, Clara sat in a small cafe downtown, a notebook open in front of her. Her husband's notes about Operation Sunfall were spread across the table. Names, phone numbers, locations, scribbled in his messy handwriting. She had spent the entire night trying to make sense of it all. There was one name that appeared again and again: Inspector Duarte. He was one of the leading officers in charge of the Brazil drug war raids. Officially, he was known as a man of integrity, a symbol of justice. But Clara's husband had written something next to his name: funding source classified. Connection to trade routes, possible cover-up. Clara didn't want to believe it. But she also knew her husband never wrote anything without reason. If what he had discovered linked Duarte to illegal deals or a hidden agenda behind the raids, then that could explain why he disappeared. She closed the notebook and glanced at her phone. Lucas's number was still saved, but calling again felt risky. She didn't want to scare him off. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling that he was somehow connected, that fate had placed him in her path for a reason. Later that day, Lucas went to check on the community center at the edge of his neighborhood. It was one of the few safe spaces they had, a small building painted blue where kids came to play and older residents gathered to share news. When he walked in, a few people were already there, huddled around a TV showing the latest updates. The anchor spoke about the raid like it was a victory. 81 arrests, she said proudly. A major blow to organized crime in Rio, but the faces in the room told another story. An older man shook his head. "They don't even talk about the ones who weren't part of it," he muttered. "People got caught in the crossfire and they just call it justice." Lucas sat down quietly, his mind racing. He didn't want to believe that the police, the ones who were supposed to protect them, could be part of something corrupt. But the more he heard, the harder it was to ignore. A local volunteer named Teresa noticed him. She had known Lucas since he was a kid. "You all right, son?" she asked gently. "Yeah," he lied. "Just tired." Teresa nodded, but she didn't believe him. "You know," she said, "your mother's strong. She's been through worse. But she worries about you. Don't keep everything inside." Lucas forced a smile. "I'll be okay." But deep down he wasn't sure he would. That evening, Clara left her apartment with her husband's notebook in her bag. She had traced one of the phone numbers in the notes to a small print shop in the south part of the city. According to the papers, Duarte's men had used it to move money, disguised as legitimate business payments. When she arrived, the shop looked ordinary. Dusty windows, stacks of paper inside, and an old man behind the counter. Clara introduced herself as a journalist researching local trade records. The man hesitated, studying her carefully before finally saying, "You shouldn't be asking about that." Her heart pounded. "Why not?" He looked around, lowered his voice, and said, "Because people who ask don't stay around for long." Before she could say another word, the door opened, and two men in plain clothes walked in. They looked official, too clean, too sharp. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The old man suddenly changed his tone, smiling nervously. "Sorry, senora. We're closed." Clara nodded, pretending to leave. But as she stepped outside, she saw one of the men glance toward her car. They knew she wasn't just a customer. She didn't go home that night. Instead, she parked near the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the waves. She opened her husband's notebook again and flipped to the last page. There, in faded ink, was one more note. "If anything happens to me, find Sunfall's witness. He's from Rocinha. 17. Clara froze. Rocinha, the same neighborhood where the raid happened. 17, the same age as Lucas. She whispered his name to herself, her eyes wide. Lucas. The next morning, Lucas woke up to a knock on the door. His mother was already gone for work, so he answered it himself. A woman stood there, pale from the heat, her hair tied back, eyes full of urgency. "Lucas," she said softly, "we need to talk." He recognized her instantly. "You're the woman from the bus," Clara nodded. "Please." "It's important." They sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with tension. Lucas poured her a glass of water, still unsure what to think. She told him about her husband, how he'd been investigating the drug operations long before the police raids began, how he'd uncovered something he called Operation Sunfall, and how he disappeared before he could publish his story. Lucas listened silently, his fingers tapping against the table. "What does that have to do with me?" he finally asked. Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, a grainy image of a man standing beside a group of young workers at the docks. In the background, barely visible, was Lucas's face. "This was taken 3 months ago," Clara said. "My husband was at the port that day. He was meeting someone who knew about the shipments. I think you were there too." Lucas stared at the photo, his throat dry. He remembered that day. He had gone to the port to deliver lunch to one of his mother's clients. He'd noticed men unloading boxes late at night, but he didn't think much of it. Clara leaned forward. "Lucas, I think you saw something the wrong people don't want anyone to remember." Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its windows tinted dark. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "If I'm right, they already know you're connected." Lucas looked toward the window. "Who's they?" Clara hesitated. "The same people who made the raid happen." Neither spoke for a long time. The hum of the city outside felt distant, almost unreal. Then Lucas said quietly, "What do we do now?" Clara looked at him, her eyes steady but full of fear. "We find the truth, before they find us." The moment Clara said those words, the air in the small kitchen seemed to freeze. "We find the truth before they find us." Lucas stared at her, his heart thudding in his chest. Outside, the faint hum of the city continued. Cars passing, children laughing in the distance. But inside, it felt like time had stopped. He wanted to believe she was exaggerating. That all of this, her missing husband, the raid, the photograph, the mysterious note, was just a strange coincidence. But deep down, something told him it wasn't. There were too many pieces that fit together too neatly. Clara leaned closer. "I think my husband left clues about what he found before he disappeared," she said quietly. "If we can trace where he went, maybe we'll understand what Operation Sunfall really is." Lucas hesitated. "But if it's that dangerous, why would you come here?" "Because you were the last connection," she said. "You were there that day at the port. You might have seen something that no one else did." Before Lucas could respond, there was a sudden knock at the door. Both of them froze. Clara's eyes widened. "Were you expecting someone?" Lucas shook his head slowly. The knocking came again, louder this time. Clara grabbed her bag and motioned for him to stay quiet. They waited, barely breathing. After a long moment, the sound faded and footsteps moved away. Clara looked through the curtain. A black car was parked across the street, the same one she'd seen earlier. 2 men sat inside, pretending to check their phones. She turned back to Lucas. "We have to go." Lucas didn't argue. He packed his things quickly, a jacket, his phone charger, and the note she had written him that first day. Within minutes, they slipped out through the back alley, moving fast but careful not to draw attention. The sky was turning orange as they reached the bus terminal. Crowds of commuters filled the platform, which gave them some cover. Clara kept glancing over her shoulder, her nerves on edge. They bought 2 tickets to Niterói across the bay. It wasn't far, but it was far enough to disappear for a while. As the bus started moving, Lucas looked out the window. The city skyline glowed in the distance. Tall buildings, the ocean, and the hills that held both beauty and danger. "What happens if they find us?" he asked quietly. Clara sighed. "Then we make sure they don't get what they're looking for." He turned to her. "And what's that?" She opened her husband's notebook and flipped to the last few pages. "Evidence," she said. "He mentioned something about shipment manifests, names of officers on the payroll, and a file, a video maybe, that proved who was behind the whole thing. But it disappeared after he did." Lucas's stomach tightened. "And you think I might know where it is?" "I think you were there when he tried to hide it." They rode in silence for a while. The hum of the bus engine filled the space between them. Lucas's mind raced through memories. The day he'd gone to the port, the strange men unloading boxes, the way one of them had yelled when he walked too close. He hadn't thought about it since. But now something clicked. "There was a truck," he said suddenly. "White, no plates. I saw the driver hand a package to someone near the dock. A tall man wearing a police jacket. But when I looked again, the man was gone." Clara's eyes widened. That could have been Duarte. He was known for working near the docks. Lucas felt a chill crawl up his spine. Then he's the one running this? Clara looked out the window. If he's not, he's protecting whoever is. Hours later, they arrived in Niterói. The city felt calmer, quieter, a sharp contrast to Rio's chaos. Clara led them to a small guest house owned by an old friend of her husband's. The woman, Marina, welcomed them without asking questions. "You're safe here for now," Marina said, handing Clara a set of keys. "But be careful. People talk. Don't tell anyone your real names." That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, watching rain hit the streetlights. His thoughts kept drifting back to the people in his neighborhood. His mother, Rafael. Everyone caught in the middle of something they didn't start. How many of them are suffering because of this corruption? He wondered. He thought about the word sunfall. It sounded poetic, almost beautiful, but the way Clara said it made it feel like something dark, something meant to stay hidden. Clara sat at the small table, going through her husband's notes again. "He mentioned a USB drive once," she said. "He said it contained everything, the names, the proof, but it vanished right before the raid." Lucas frowned. "If it's gone, how do we find it?" Clara looked up. "We start where it ended, in the docks." The next day they returned to Rio, blending into the early morning crowd. The area near the port was still under surveillance, but they managed to slip through a side entrance near the warehouses. The smell of salt and metal hung heavy in the air. Lucas pointed to a corner near the water. "That's where I saw the truck." They searched quietly, checking around crates and containers. At one point, Clara found a broken security camera lying on the ground. "They destroyed the footage," she muttered. Someone wanted to make sure there was no record. As they moved deeper into the dock, Lucas noticed something. A faint mark on the wall, almost like initials carved into the metal. "RM," he pointed. "What's that?" Clara's breath caught. "Those were my husband's initials." They followed the markings to a small storage unit half hidden behind stacked containers. The lock was rusted, but Lucas managed to pry it open with a metal rod. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of oil. It looked empty, except for a single wooden crate in the corner. Clara approached it slowly. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside was a small waterproof box. She opened it carefully, and there it was. A flash drive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "This has to be it," Clara whispered. "The proof." Lucas reached for it, but just as he did, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Clara's heart jumped. They turned. Two men stood in the doorway, one of them holding a badge. "Clara Mendes," the man said coldly. "You shouldn't have come back here." Lucas recognized the voice instantly. He'd heard it on TV. "Inspector Duarte." Clara stepped in front of Lucas, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "So it's true," she said. "Operation Sunfall was never about justice." Duarte smiled faintly. "Justice is a matter of perspective." He nodded to the other officer. "Take the boy." Before Lucas could react, the officer grabbed his arm. Clara tried to pull him back, shouting, but Duarte stepped closer, his expression calm and cruel. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," he said. "And people like you, people who dig too deep, end up buried with their secrets." Lucas's pulse raced. Clara's grip tightened on the flash drive hidden in her fist. The sound of sirens blared faintly in the distance, growing louder, closer. Duarte turned his head for just a second, distracted. Clara met Lucas's eyes. "Run," she whispered. He hesitated. "Run," she said again, pushing him toward the door. Lucas bolted into the maze of containers as gunshots echoed in the air. The dock lights flickered, alarms blared, and rain began to fall hard against the metal roofs. He didn't look back. He just ran, clutching the flash drive that Clara had slipped into his pocket at the last second. Somewhere behind him, Clara's voice shouted his name, and then was swallowed by the storm. Lucas ran through the maze of containers, rain soaking his clothes, heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. The flash drive burned in his pocket, small but heavier than anything he'd ever carried. Behind him, the sound of gunshots and shouting faded into the storm, but he knew it wasn't over. Duarte wouldn't let them escape that easily. He ducked behind a stack of crates, catching his breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Clara had pushed him to run, but he had no idea where she was. The last thing he saw was her standing her ground against Duarte, fearless yet vulnerable. His chest tightened with fear and guilt. Lucas edged forward cautiously, following the narrow alleys between the containers. That's when he noticed a shadow moving faster than it should have. Someone else was there. Not Duarte's men, but another figure, smaller and lighter on their feet. Lucas froze. The figure stepped out of the shadows. "Lucas?" The voice was soft, almost familiar. He squinted through the rain. It was Raphael, his friend from the neighborhood, the same boy who had disappeared during the raid weeks ago. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "Raphael, where have you been?" Raphael didn't answer immediately. He looked around nervously, eyes darting to the shadows. "I've been hiding. I saw what they did to my family. I've been tracking Duarte's movements, waiting for the right moment to help." You shouldn't be here alone." Lucas's mind raced. Raphael knew about Duarte? How much did he know? Before he could ask, Raphael grabbed his arm. "Come with me. There's something you need to see. Something that changes everything." They ran together, slipping between containers until they reached a hidden stairwell leading to a lower warehouse level. The place smelled of salt and machinery. Dim lights flickered above as Raphael led Lucas to a room tucked behind a heavy metal door. Inside, the walls were covered with stacks of crates. Shipping manifests and crates stamped with company logos Lucas had never seen. Raphael opened a small safe embedded in the wall and pulled out a thick envelope. "This isn't just a flash drive," he said. "It's a part of something much bigger. Duarte's been covering for powerful people, not just in Rio but across Brazil. My family. They got caught because we stumbled onto it." Lucas took the envelope, his hands trembling. The flash drive felt insignificant compared to what Raphael was showing him. Letters, photos, and documents exposing a network of corruption that stretched far beyond the local drug war. He realized the raids, the arrests, even the so-called massive police operation, were all part of a larger plan to eliminate anyone who could reveal the truth. Before Lucas could absorb it all, the room went dark. The lights flickered once, then a voice echoed from the stairwell. "Thought you could hide from me?" Duarte's voice. Lucas and Raphael exchanged a panicked look. Duarte's men were closing in faster than they realized. Raphael shoved a small panel in the wall, revealing an escape tunnel. "This way," he whispered urgently. As they crawled through the narrow tunnel, Lucas's mind raced. The flash drive, the envelope, Clara, were they still alive? And why had Raphael been hiding all this time? Something about his friend's story didn't fully add up. Finally, they emerged near the docks, but instead of the bustling city, it was eerily quiet. A boat was waiting, engines idling. Raphael grabbed Lucas and shoved him onto it. "We don't have much time. Duarte knows more than we thought. He's expecting us to make a mistake." Lucas sat down, gripping the envelope and flash drive tightly. The boat sped away into the darkness, the rain blurring the lights of Rio behind them. He realized this wasn't just about surviving. It was about exposing the truth behind the Brazil drug war, Operation Sunfall, and the powerful figures who had manipulated the entire system. As the city disappeared behind the fog, Lucas felt the weight of what lay ahead. He had escaped, but the real danger was just beginning. Duarte wouldn't stop until he had what Lucas now carried, evidence that could bring down an empire, or get them all killed, and somewhere deep in his pocket, the flash drive reminded him that the story was far from over. Pick up from the previous section and write revealing the story's climax. Resolve the main conflicts, but include a final unexpected twist to surprise the audience. The climax should be intense and satisfying, providing a resolution to the key plot points while maintaining suspense until the very end. Keep the narrative engaging with relevant keywords. Also, do not make any headings. Only write story in paragraphs. Also, keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also, make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI-generated. Also, don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. Lucas, Clara, and Raphael stood on the rooftop of the safe house, watching the first light of dawn spread over Rio. The city was quiet now, almost eerily so, as if holding its breath after the chaos of the past weeks. The massive police operation that had left 64 dead and 81 arrested in the Brazil drug war was still the talk of the news. But now, thanks to the evidence they had delivered, the truth was emerging. Duarte's influence was collapsing, and those who had hidden behind fear and corruption were finally being held accountable. Lucas let out a long breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease for the first time in what felt like forever. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from a teenager simply trying to survive, to someone holding the evidence that could expose an empire built on fear. Clara, standing beside him, looked just as exhausted but determined. There was a quiet strength in her presence, a reminder that courage often came in unexpected forms. Raphael broke the silence. They're going to investigate every lead now. Duarte's allies won't have anywhere to hide, but we have to stay careful. Some of these people won't give up quietly. Lucas nodded. The reality of the situation settled over him. The Brazil drug war wasn't over, not entirely, but a major chapter had been rewritten. Corrupt officials were being questioned, and journalists were publishing every piece of evidence. The public was finally seeing the truth about the Rio raid and the manipulations behind it. Clara turned to Lucas, handing him a small notebook she had kept during the ordeal. "I wanted you to have this," she said softly. "Notes, observations, people to trust. Everything that helped me survive. Maybe it can help you too."